Okay. Hello, everyone. The title of tonight's episode is titled When Stillness Removes the Mind. Now, before I get into the value of the words silent awakening, the reason I've kind of titled it moved rather than one word is because sometimes when something moves, the past that thing carried ceases to exist. What that means is that every day the person wakes up and they could have a commonality that means like you before you sleep you think of like what you're going to do tomorrow, and then you wake up in the morning and you go do that thing. So the same idea of the future is there, but if you pay attention, a lot of people I find commonly don't, that your sense of past is different every day. And so even though you may have the same memory, but is it the same you remembering the same memory? And so what is the value of stillness in a moving world, for a moving intelligence? Stillness and silence were tools. They were mirrors of some sort, as if all words have extended from the silence, all sounds. And then we see in regards to motion, it is stillness. For a moving, living being, what is what is death to us? It is the stillness and decomposition of the forces that were elementally kept. So think of it this way, that imagine your mind appears to you as some sort of room, where this cosmos, this manifest phenomena of the moment, it is present in a certain way. Now imagine you were removed from that or you moved somewhere else. You would see, in some sense, the conditions of your definition will change. In stillness and silence, the mind finds a mirror. The poet Rumi tells us, "Let the waters settle and you shall see the moon and the stars mirrored in your being." This is the notion that every thought that the person has, it's as if, think of your mind as some sort of surface of a pond. Every thought, action, or incident that occurs is like a rock thrown into this pond and itself ripples. The sooner in the day you get rid of the ripples, the rocks that are thrown at you, the ideology that visits you throughout the day, um, the moment you can acknowledge something, it's as if like the ripples will stop. And the human intelligence is very sensitive. It is very sensitive because its standard of itself is in accordance to its mind, and its mind works with many projections of the body. That means if I'm sitting here, but I remember myself when I was 10 years old, then in some sense, who am I right now? Am I the 10-year-old self's future, or am I, in some sense, the future's past? Who would the person be? And so, you see, this is why I do not define the self by image. This is very basic stuff. Pretty much think of it this way: human beings, their eyes opened, they began speaking to one another in tribal dynamics. However, their minds had not awakened yet. It is fair to say that the body found harmony with the natural world way before the mind did. Because the what we call a mind is an embodied soul. It is the subtler body of what reigns supreme as the natural presence of the being. Life becomes, it shifts from being the performance of an individual to the presence of a collective. It's strange, but it's as if the next levels, the next dimensions of the human potential, the mind's potential for the human being, lie in its identification of self with a more accurate vision of reality, of nature. There's this remarkable uh, Indian story of enlightenment. And the story is there's this man who seeks the truth, he seeks the ultimate excellence, the ultimate excellence of like kind of self awareness. And what happens is this guy goes to this guru, and this guru is meditating in the morning somewhere. This person is considered by the village as enlightened. And he goes to this enlightened person, and how the story plays out, that man is actually enlightened. And so the guy asks the sage, and he's like, "Hey man, I want to get enlightened. What should I do?" And the sage just closes his eyes, goes into some meditative state as if he's receiving some insight. And so he opens his eyes, comes to the man, and he's like, "Strangely, you have to take 400 of my cows into the mountains, and when there are 1,000, come back. That's your path to enlightenment." And this guy's like, "Wait a minute. Is this some sort of joke?" But then he thinks, why would this guy trust me with 400 of his cows? So probably there's something to it. And so what happens is that this man takes the cows. He takes the cows to some grassland up in the mountains, and it's a relatively long journey, and he takes the cows somehow. You know, he had good shepherd skills. And and so this man eventually finds himself sitting on a rock in this blissful kind of natural environment, and at the same time just looking at the sheep. And he eventually, the days get so boring, and he's just sitting on the rock waiting for these sheeps to get to 1,000. And what happens is he suddenly forgets. The story it kind of explains this phenomenon that occurs, that once we are in the same place for too long, we forget who we were. This person stays there so long looking at the sheep that he eventually forgets why he was there. He forgets, in some sense, how to even speak. And he's just sitting there in this silence where it's as if he's been in nature so long, he's become a part of it. And so suddenly, one day, as the story goes, one of the cows comes to the guy and he's like, "Hey man, we're 1,000, we can go back." And the guy is in some sense so blissed out in this natural state he's in, he hears the cow and he's like, "Okay, let's go back," you know. And suddenly he realizes he's forgotten the way back. And suddenly the birds and the wind, as the story goes, the birds and the wind tell him which direction to go. And he eventually goes, and he's like, kind of like, imagine like Lord of the Rings 2 kind of reference where Gandalf is like with his army. Suddenly it's like a wizard's never late or early. This dude is coming back with like an army of cows behind him. And so he, in some sense, comes to the guru, and the guru coincidentally is there when he arrives. And so he sees the guru takes one look at him, and the guy says, "All right, I remember now. Here are the cows. Like your cows are 1,000. Now tell me, what is this enlightenment truth?" You know. And so the guy looks at the man and smiles and says, "You already know it." And it seems to be a sort of acknowledgement of a sort of natural abidance of how the natural being is designed. It's as if rather than the being behaving naturally, it's behaving unnaturally and then creating technologies to compensate for how it is not natural. You know, so rather than us trying to live like the most efficient human being, we're making technologies that make the human being efficient. And in some sense, something that is not like like when Friedrich Nietzsche, this German philosopher, he said, "God is dead and we killed him." What he meant is that the unknown is under siege by the solidification of knowledge as knowledge. Seldom it is said, but knowledge is it's a war. You see, it's like ideas are fighting to be in people's attention. And this savageness is chaotic because it's going to kind of, it's a fragmentation of civilization. Think of as if the whole species, everything, every infrastructure that's on the surface of this planet, that is from the human being. Imagine right now you forgot about nations, about different ethnicities, and you just saw that it was one species, one human species. That means you could not go to another human being and say you're not part of the human species. By nature, by design, we are members. Okay? Now, this civilization, now imagine the whole planet acknowledges a sort of collective selfhood, a sort of self of the species, as if we have suddenly, through the efficiency and the advanced communication of the members of the human species has found a collective entity. It found itself as a collective entity. So I want you to see that it's as if, you know how like a psychologist may perhaps say that, you know, certain patients, I mean, Jordan Peterson, when you listen to his talks, you learn many things. And Jordan Peterson, he was speaking about a certain clients he had where their psyche were in some sense fragmented, you know, and he even wondered about his own psyche being fragmented after becoming aware of a sort of deeper dimension of the observance of his perception. So what I'm trying to say is that there is this notion that the psyche is fragmented. For example, when I walk in downtown Toronto, I see people on the streets like shouting at them. Uh, shout like they're talking to themselves. They're talking to people who are not there. And when I wonder about that situation, I could totally see how it's not just a stage of fragmentation of psyche, it's a sort of being slowly devoured by the inner reality. And when I say devoured by the inner reality, that word might seem a bit extreme. I'll say it like this: whatever comes into your attention becomes a part of you. When you're hungry, you have to get food in front of your attention. Do you see? And so it is the survival of the attention. This is what people who explained survival didn't explain. They didn't say that it's not about survival of the fittest, whoever is the most strongest, you know, loudest and angriest wins, you know? It is about survival of attention and the various ways that attention can continue. So we can say this fragmentation, this fragmentation in the psyche and the person could be seen, if the civilization, all of humanity could be seen as one collective mind. So the species has a collective mind, let's say, and this mind, its fragmentation of psyche of the civilization would be the worshipping of the individual. You see, when I saw that person in downtown Toronto shouting and screaming, it's not that that person was insane to me. That person was still a human being in a world, okay? But the issue was that the mental reality had in some sense taken them. The mental reality takes you when you in some sense have an objective chaos, a confrontation that is so objectively chaotic that your personality in that moment dies. It doesn't just die, you're pushed back into your mind. And so when I look at downtown Toronto, do you know what I see? I remember I went home and I was asked in some sense, how was downtown Toronto? And the first time I went there and I came home, I had many tears. Not tears, exterior tears, as if my heart was broken in the failure of the inefficiency of the civilization to continue. And so I said I saw defeated people. Downtown is a place where the successful and the defeated walk the same streets. And when I say defeated, they have been the people, for example, that guy shouting to himself, you know, alone in the, like, you know, on the, like that guy walking the street, it looks to the common man as crazy behavior. But to the psychologist, the person's behavior is in accordance to their attention. And where is that being's attention? Now, most people, their attention moves because there's something of value. Okay, we understand that we're changing beings, and because we change, we at least try to value the decision making. That means after through the processes of evolution and the various factors that influence this evolution, in some sense, the free will came into motion, came into development. The free will was based on its decision making, and its decisions were based on data. So data became the information age, in some sense began taking our attention. Human beings realized it's not all about just physical well-being, it is also about a sort of your mind is breathing well as well. And your mind breathes well when it realigns itself to the moment, and it's always doing that. That means it's kind of like something magnificent about this life and about the free will, regardless of how much you feel, you want to feel you're in control of your life. You cannot avoid the natural forces that dictate the expression. Like, I cannot change my voice right now. Do you know the natural way it comes about? It's like this. So similarly, it's as if the free will, the vehicle, the free will is moving, as if like you didn't design the car, but you can steer the car. Okay, when you buy the car, you can steer the car. So it's similarly, this is why spiritual notions were at all entertained, simply because there was a sort of vehicle dynamic. The attention seemed to have deeper roots. Like, you look at a tree and you see the branches are open, but the roots are in the soil which your eyes can't see. Okay, so similarly, when you look at knowledge, it is the way it's acknowledged is like a tree. If you remember, it's like there's the fountain of youth and then there's the tree of knowledge. And the reason knowledge is a tree is because from the singular existential opportunity of the trunk comes the various branches of knowledge. Okay, so one force becomes divided. So all the different faculties in a university are just, it's an act. Do you see? It's as if all reality, every branch of everything relates to everything. Even Leonardo da Vinci is ascribed to have said this quote, where there's this quote ascribed to him where he says, to develop a complete mind, study the science of art. Study the art of science. Learn to see, realize how everything connects to everything else. And trust me, the moment you realize this, suddenly you will understand why the wing of a butterfly was theorized to move tidal waves across the world. So, the fragmentation, anytime one set of ideology or an individual begins, in some sense, having the attention of people there, how would I say it? If you really, anybody who cares for the world, you will care for the mind of your world. And you will realize the best way you can care for the mind is to give it freedom. The greatest relationships and the most efficient technologies arise out of a freedom. The incredible innovation, genius, and even like we have prodigies and whatnot arising in this world. Like, I don't know, like 5-year-old, Chinese kids playing instruments in ways that the most, everybody in all the other cultures are shocked. Like, it's incredible for me, the potential that this species has and how much of it is not being used. It's as if there is a gold mine here and everybody thinks that there's nothing in their pockets. The world is filled with incredible value, but you have to extract it out by trusting your intelligence. And your intelligence is not something that could be measured. I repeated this earlier, and I'll repeat it earlier in another talk, but I'll repeat it here. The person who came up with the IQ test has an incredibly low IQ because that person felt intelligence was only response based. Sometimes you shouldn't just respond to the world given. Sometimes the student asks the question, why should I even be asking this question that the teachers are asking? And so I believe half of life, outer reality becomes your teacher. And then the later half of life, the inner reality becomes your teacher. For me, I kind of realize it's all about preference. Your karma has to do with your subconscious preference, if you notice. And so once the attention from the individual mode of being transitions to a collective mode, that collectivity is shapeless, by the way. So greatness, it's like it is possible, but who says it has a shape? Who says truth has a shape that our eyes can see? Who says the surface of the ocean is suggesting how the depth is? Not at all. There's many ways this world is kept that we cannot even perceive. If we were, it would require dissolution. Internally, when the meditator, in some senses, attains a sort of calmness, this is called the sort of divine calmness, a divine breeze that hits the meditating individual. This divine breeze is actually a letting go of the thought of the future. It doesn't mean you stop planning things. It doesn't mean you don't. Every day should be a new exploration for the being, or else life is looping around. Our society has defined its civility and its progress based on its technological efficiency, and there's a danger to that. When you measure the progress of a civilization based on its technologies, eventually not eventually, but you're in some sense avoiding the value of the significance of the user of technology. You see? What did the ape that was jumping around from branch to branch have? The chimpanzee that was jumping from branch to branch, and who the human being came to be, like the human being sitting in the subway waiting to go to work, you know? Who did that person become? You know, like how did the intelligence differ? In one manner, man was not separate, was physically separated, but the mind of the being was still in the hands of nature. Like I have no idea how the cavemen reproduce. It was just natural animalistic genes probably, you know? Because for me, even childbirth for the human being is still a confusion for me, you know? The detachment of the umbilical cord, especially with the mind of the caveman, there are some things that are, of course, I find mysteries, either personal mysteries or impersonal mysteries. Sometimes you wonder about how you're looking at it. Sometimes you're wondering about how the thing actually looks. And reality is one of those things where you got to snap out of the cultural programs spoon fed, and it's nobody's fault. There is no evil person wanting to destroy everything. There's no, like, an evil person has to care for something, or why else is he being evil? You see, anarchy is another thing. There are some evil people who their philosophies allows the world to be evil. It's like there's spice on their meal, you know, to be evil. But there are some people who, in some sense, it's as if that this is the fear of chaos, the hidden order, and this is the fear of order, the hidden chaos. You understand this concept, you will understand the outcome. That means many people are looking at the beginning of their karma. They're like, oh, they think that what's happening to them is the end result of the karma. No, life is, this is how it happens. Before you speak, in stillness and silence, there is no conceptual reality. The conceptual reality will cease to exist. That means it is only by the movement. That means if this heart didn't beat, there would be no mind. Do you know? And what I mean by that is that there requires a sort of on off, on off, on off dynamic for the intelligence to kind of function. So the design is incredibly unique, and I can totally understand how how the religious narrative led to a powerful ethos. And what I mean by that is like the inspirations of a group of people and why the ideology lived so long. You see, for me, if you think of language and words from the time they were created as structures, and you gave it a certain height, you could, in some sense, see all words that ever historically have been recorded, when the way that since the time they have come into existence and how long they have been kept, that idea gets a certain height. Okay, and it has to do with the origin of it. I'm being playful here, guys, with what I'm saying right now. I'm saying that knowledge can be seen as a city based on when the buildings were made or when the words came into existence. A silent awakening is very different than a vocal awakening. When you look at the New Age community, these people, the way they're engaging the concept of enlightenment, they're like, yo, somebody has the magic wand, tap me on the head with, you know? That was pretty much the guru. You guys won't believe it. In ancient times, in some sense, the guru would put his thumb on the forehead of the disciple and kind of literally tilt their thumb on, like, open their third eye. You know, I'm being poetic here, but in some sense, now I'm not trying to reduce that action because a ceremonial practice has many ways to be seen. You see, that means it's like me trying to define the experience of blowing a candle. There's many ways it could be had. You know, there's many people who their attention in their own unique way has dabbled with an idea and transformed, dirt into diamond. I find that we are in a room conceptually where the edges of it are chaotic. That means the center of the egoic construct, the sense of self that we have, it is being centered, like the center of our world is this ordered harmony. All human beings are trying to somehow find this. It's kind of like your balance, like your foot has to be on the ground. So the way the psychology of the human being is grounded is that it wants more. Okay, you have to want more because it's the nature of hunger. Like I remember there came a moment in my life where I hadn't ate for 3 days, and I remember there was a sort of financial issue. Like in a few days I would have something, but at that moment I didn't. And I remember it was a moment where I sat down, and I wasn't sad at all. For me, I had a sort of mystical approach to the moment. So for me, it was like pain didn't make a noise unless it had to. And so I was there, and I remember I sat down on a bench. It was like 9 a.m. and I checked my ATM. It was it wasn't what I expected. And I remember I just sat down, and automatically tears were coming out of my eyes. And but I wasn't sad. It was weird. It was a moment where I was looking at my body, and it seemed like the inefficiency of the physical of the body. It's as if my body was crying, and I was watching it. And it was a very significant moment because it was a sort of, I recognize how much of a person's psychology has to do with the maintenance of their biology. That means sometimes you see a person insane on the street, but you may wonder how many days has it been since that guy's ate, you know? And so I don't see the judicial system even caring for the inner workings of behind the eyes of the being. Usually people care for what's in front of the eyes of the person. They're like, show me your value, put it on the table. And some things you can never put on the table because they belong to the secret where your eyes have opened to the world. Mr. Within's recommendation is that, you see, evolution cannot be shaped or defined because how something evolves can be so multifaceted based on how individual the idea is kept, you know? So right now I'm saying I'm a person I'm a like imagine right now a very secular viewpoint. A secular viewpoint is that, okay, I was born on here, on this planet. I am an objective being, and my brain, and especially the frontal lobe, is in some sense generating my intellectualization of the world. So the person feels they are an objective biological projector of intelligence. So pretty much the secular viewpoint acknowledges reality as, in some sense, the story of your life is a hallucination of chemicals that are led from chemicals. It's as if brain chemistry cannot be judged, can it? You know? And so it can be judged in the story of the world, but it cannot be judged as just a chemical phenomena, as just a purely elemental phenomena. See, it's so important to know the elements because and not only chemistry. I have an incredible respect for chemistry, even though the first chemistry teacher I ever had was that, like, I considered him like karmically that man was incredibly like rude to me, you know. But he had an authentic interest in chemistry, so at least that was kind of like good to learn from, And the guy was kind of evil, man. Like, I'll tell you this, guys, in Tehran International School, I attended there for a few years, and this was like, what is this, grade 5, something like that. And in grade 5, this chemistry teacher, we all knew like he was a bit messed up. He was just like an angry person. That means his life was probably in a chaotic condition where malevolence was his inspiration. Sometimes people are thrown into such corners that the animal has nothing else to do but to fight back, you know? And if you hate the world, evil becomes okay. If you love the world, it will never be okay. So the minds of people becomes divided. It's their own actions that define them, you know? And the mind is incredible because a certain moment can echo. That means like imagine the first time you won something as a human being. It's as if it becomes memorable. It becomes memorable, and the significance of that moment begins echoing into the future. For me, I think I have just finalized my comprehension of this world in a realization that thoughts come and go, and therefore I have a playful approach towards the temporary, and in some sense, a very preferenceless view towards the eternal. It's as if, how can a person have an opinion on something that is what it is forever? You see, this was one of the most profound, it's the most, it's like a philosophical question that just shocks every branch of knowledge. And this philosophical question, even theologists and many psychologists, is that it's this notion, it's this question, it's as if all human beings have gathered around and they're just wondering about this point. It's the notion that if the person is an eternal being, and this eternal being is in some sense, let's say, constantly, it's like a, there's a sort of cyclical existence to this eternal phenomena, you know, pretty much this is the question. Why does an eternal being need to survive? And if it is concluded that its approach, its design is wrong, it will become inactive. If it thinks its design is right, it will just be in the activity of its design. There is, of course, ownership of many things. I want you to imagine this. Imagine on this earth, people right now were like, oh man, you know, that nation belongs to that, you know, and those people, and da 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 da, like the world is divided up. A cake has been broken up into pieces, and the cake are fighting over which one needs to get eaten first. You know, an eternal being cannot be defined by terminology that has arose from a temporary being. Just like how a person goes to the grocery store and sees the grocery store is closed, the same behavior the person will find when they find that language is hollow. When language is hollow, it means you don't need to worship it. You see, people, there was idol worship. You know, the Abrahamic religion centered around this. Ibrahim was known in some sense, go to a group of people who were worshiping idols and was like, he was pretty much like, why are you guys worshiping objects? And those guys said, we do what we want, you know? And so one day they leave and all their gods were in one building. And so what Ibrahim does is he breaks the all the idols except one and puts the hammer beside the idol, and he's just waiting in the room for these guys to come. These guys suddenly come back and they're like, oh my God, our gods are broken, you know? And in that moment, they suddenly they look at Ebrahim, and they're all like, Ebrahim, did you do this? And Ebrahim says, no. You know, this one god took the hammer and broke all the other gods. And they're like, he can't take the hammer. That's just stick and bone.
or something, that's like stuff. That's an object that can't pick up the hammer. And suddenly Abraham was like, yeah, ta-da. Suddenly idol worship was snapped out of. It's just an evolutionary paradigm. Many ideas, their value is temporary too. So the idols of man's worship were broken. Now look at what happened next. After idol worship, what did people start worshiping? They started worshiping language. They started worshiping language. And first it was through the revelation of books. And once it was in the revelation of books, suddenly language became there was a sort of ceremonial uh, interweaving of language with the attention, with thought. I don't want to say interweaving. I want to say it's kind of like the being's attention accepted language for the world as the world. The thing is, civilization should be seen as this giant boat. And if this boat has one hole in it, guess what? We can all, the people on the other side where the hole isn't there, they could all be happy and stuff. But the ship is sinking. The ship is sinking whenever efficiency is being ignored. Efficiency has to include novelty. Novelty is a permission of your imagination and memory to no longer define what happens next, because the new is approaching. So it's as if the same way, as if like God's will was revealed in Scripture, is in some sense the same way that language became matter in our minds. So we are in a sort of linguistic simulation. It's like the species is in a slumber, but this slumber is just a limitation to only a intellectual sort of conceptual domain. So it's as if thoughts are being us. We think we can just write a resume and show it to the boss and think that's who we are. What a joke! That becomes a performance. It's as if everybody who succeeds in the economical force, if they understand how to sales. Do you understand? Like it's as if like the art of war, deceive your enemy, and how you deceive the enemy is by hiding your weaknesses in stories of strength. And I saw that when I had a sort of sales job. This is a seasonal job back in the day. This is like 2010, 2011. And when I was the environment I was exposed was pretty much like the boiler room movie scene. I was suddenly in a place where incredible salesmen were there, right? And so what I recognize from the sales is that the salesman is a person going in there being like, I want this. I want you to buy this, right? And so that's the goal. So it's as if two human beings in one moment, their values are different, you see? So because the results require to be different. And what that means is the people are fighting for the right world. Doesn't matter if it's just in a religious context or any other context. Even the war among two nations is the same way we see like the belief wars, the religious belief wars, we see any sort of belief system at war. Because everything that comes into shape and defines itself wants to keep its definitions. That means if you're a good person and you've always been good, you know, and suddenly you see something bad and you're like, okay, I'm not going to go near that bad, I'm good. The reason you're getting pulled is because the definition by your attention doesn't want to change. You see? I find that eventually one will come to the great conclusion, as Sri Ramana Maharshi says. He says, let go what goes. Oh, sorry, he says, let come what comes. Let go what goes. See what remains. And that seeing what remains, if Henry David Thoreau was here right now and he heard that quote, he'd probably be like, Henry David Thoreau has this quote where he says, it's not what you're looking at that matters, it's what you see. So do you understand the difference? In some sense, they are both kind of saying the same thing actually in a parallel way, where one is saying, watch the world, and the other is saying, don't think that what you see is only what matters. That's a really great step of, you don't understand how much of your intelligence unlocks with humility. Behaviorally, there's ways that your intelligence can activate. Now, there is a sort of intuition that each being gets based on their genetical and also their psychological development. That means society is a sort of playground where if you understand the game, you can go play in it. But if the game is incomprehensible to you, you will just travel. And then the way life is oriented becomes different. Any person who really has some level of care for these Mr. Within talks, the main point is that you study your attention. Something that no teacher gave you was a mirror. The teacher didn't come in the classroom and gave a mirror, you know? We have to see, it's as if, imagine the simulation theory. Elon Musk was asked about the simulation theory in an interview, and he said there's 1 billionth of a chance that this reality is a simulation, kind of like this perfected video game. And so we see that if reality is a simulation, okay, the first step is to, in some sense, become self-aware. Okay, to try to see what is real in that which appears as unreal. It's even fair to say that no person on this planet has ever seen what the world really looks like. Do you see? Because they have had access to a certain way of the data approaching them. So in some sense, it's as if the world has a bias of the limitations of our senses, objectively speaking. When I speak about multidimensionality, I tend to speak about it in the sense that there's the objective realm, like literally look in this moment, like just look at yourself for one moment right now. There's an objective dimension. You see your physical sense of being, and then this physical sense of being, imagine like this is the main concept. The context is your mind. It's the intelligence that is animating this material existence. So there is an animating sort of force here. Now, this animating force is really kind of like a debate between whether it's the intelligence of an individual particle or it's the intelligence of a collective field. When you look at all of mysticism, all of like religious metaphysical ideals and various ideologies, it's like there's only human beings on this planet. Their metaphysics is divided into two things: either everything is a field of intelligence, everything is connected, or in some sense everything is a particle. Do you see? And I feel psychologically the evolution is occurring in that way, where we are returning to nature and using our mistakes as a mirror. It's like that moment, for example, even in the Avengers movie, think of Hulk, or even think more emotionally and more in a pristine way. Think of as if this wife who, like her husband, has gone suddenly in this anger, this intense rage and anger, and in that intense moment of rage and anger, the wife suddenly says, for example, like, remember yourself or something like that. And that notion is that the person who is trying to handle that chaotic complexity reverts to the simple origin of that chaotic complexity. Sometimes when problems occur, it doesn't mean you should fight all the time. It means you got to step back, look at what's happening, and then function. It becomes a sort of automated directive. It's as if, like, even in the Art of War, there were certain, I don't remember the exact passage, but there was a sort of imagery communicated. Sun Tzu was kind of saying that it's like you have to see, you have to adjust to the dynamic of the challenge. So it's as if the greatest warriors are ones where before they have picked up the sword, there has never been the thought of picking up the sword. Do you see? It's as if it's an allowance, you know, an existential allowance of awareness to be content with what it is. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening so far. If there's any questions, the Q&A is like up for 2 minutes. Study the way the world has opened your eyes, and also study how your eyes open the world. Eventually, the recognition of the true nature, a sign of it is that you begin to trust the energetic presence of your being first. It's as if the person might not know what they're going to do in this life, let's say. But you start off with the trust of the energetic presence. Your attention has to be on, it's like enlightenment that avoids the body is blind. It's not blind, it's kind of like you're going to see this body as a sort of allowance of sensory data. It's as if I've thought about it. I don't have kids at the moment, but I thought about it one day if my son came to me and said, like, you know, Dad, who am I? I would obviously, like, whenever a child asks a question, you gotta ask the question back to see what the child is asking. But if I was to give an honest answer to honest ears, I would tell my child, you are where your attention goes. And the attention moves. This talk is being recorded now. Years from now, I would totally be a different being. It's just the nature of change. We are living in a design. The attention is ignited through this mode of manifestation. The civilization has built tools. But now, we must move beyond even the technologies we've built. You know how they say, like in war, like Chinese emperors probably entertained this notion that you want to kill a snake, you gotta cut its head. You know, you gotta get rid of the source of the problem. You know, and so this mentality, when we have to look that if we were to reverse engineer this idea in a better context, we would kind of say if we wanted to shift, not shift, but to just see if the civilization could function in a better way, we would have to go see the major stories that are being told to children. What children don't realize is, regardless of how each grade feels different, pretty much what's happening is they're entering a room and data is being shared to them. You see, so waves of data have been shaped into various classrooms. Now, this fundamentally, it's a person with data. If you acknowledge this, you don't understand. It's as if the word critical thinking would no longer be necessary, even because the person would see that it's all about observance. And once you have, in some sense, played the games of this life long enough, your eyes will open up differently to this world. The educational system is, in some sense, what needs to change. And it needs to change by reprinting a new view of the world. And this new view of the world doesn't have to be ideologically try to be superior. For the first time, we're going to use ideas to build something that's going to harbor more than the dimensions of ideology, you know? There is a vanishing point to thought, and it's not just through the biological kind of like when you sleep suddenly in deep sleep there's no thought, as if that's the vanishing point of thought. And I'm saying there's a sort of vanishing point of thought while the mind is conscious in the waking state. This vanishing point of thought is the elimination of the implication of the objective phenomena as it has been received. What I'm trying to say is that we have been sold on a story of ourselves which no longer is necessary. It is too old. It's as if I see, in some sense, for example, atheists on YouTube battling theists, and the atheist looks at the theist and is like, why should we still use a story from the 6th century? You know? And the crowd applauds. But suddenly we see the educational system, its fundamental design has not changed since the days of the British Empire, where soldiers had to immediately learn information quickly and run to another bunker and relay the information or whatever as accurately as possible. So we see it's as if the test of education is how alert it can be to what it's doing. Intelligence is only, there's no IQ test, and there's only one factor, I playfully say, that can decide it. It's self-awareness. Who is aware of what is going on? You know? That's the genius of the moment. There's this story of these two Zen monks. These Zen monks, after lunch, they're taking their meal, kind of wooden bowl, like to wash it by the river. These two monks are friends, imagine childhood friends. And so when they're suddenly there, let's not say childhood friends, that's going to ruin the story. They're not childhood friends, they're just two Zen monks, in the same monastery. And so as they're suddenly by the river, suddenly one of the monks sees a scorpion has taken a wrong turn, like a lost tourist, into the river, and is being slowly washed off into the river. Instantly, the Zen monk gets the bowl, the wooden bowl he has, and saves the scorpion. But the scorpion stings him in the process somehow. And so he suddenly puts the scorpion in the bowl on the ground and holds his hand, and it just closes his eyes. And then his friend sees all this, who's right beside him, and he says, "Hey," he says, he doesn't say anything. He's just quiet. It's like it's this intense moment. This guy just got stung by a scorpion. You know, And so what happens is the guy goes to clean the pole. The guy opens his eyes. He's calm after that chaotic incident, and he goes to clean the bowl. And the shocking thing happens is that he frees the scorpion to go on land, but he gets stung again. And his friend just turns around to him, the other Zen monk, and says, "My friend, why do you keep trying to save that scorpion when you know its nature is to sting? By design, it is meant to sting, you know?" And this was the very profound point of the story that made me really remember the story, actually. And the friend looks at the friend who got stung, who opens his eyes again and is like has absorbed the chaotic pain and internally made it disappear. He suddenly looks at his friend and he says, "Because it's my nature to save it. I am designed to live for life." You know? And it's a very profound moment. It's as if the same way the nature of the scorpion was to sting, the nature of the human mind was to thrive on its ultimate compassionate efficiency. We must design new avenues for thought in the educational system. Children must be given the most complex global issues. And the way is the educational system is now making up its own curriculum, like good job, but I find a better curriculum would be, and I'm speaking of a global community because that's the best way, most efficient way to speak about this. Eventually, the inevitable outcome, the unification that brings it forth. It's as if, like, imagine uh, the greatest warriors joining to fight the same war. It becomes a sort of a mixture of mastery among various members of the species, who their mastery becomes how much they see their civilization being alive. It's as if we don't realize, but all human beings should treat the advancement of humanity as if it's like your child. You care for this. You care for this science project called humanity, where after 4 billion years there has even come this evolutionary possibility, and we are still lost at wars of language. Human beings are fighting over territory, over resources. Good job, but what is the point? What is the point of just taking as much as you can and hiding in your cave? Reality demands for greater efforts. These greater efforts are inspired by the authentic action of the human being. The authentic action means the 1 year of the person is open to, in some sense, the presence of nature, and the other year of the person is open to, in some sense, the psychology of the unnatural. And once you've reached that train station in the clouds, you stand awaiting questions that make the world be a place where it's as if when you wonder about where reality is going, there's no need to name the end. One of the most powerful, kind of inspirational statements I've ever heard is "the show must go on." It surpasses the any sort of rationalization from an individual point. Whoever is listening to this, thanks for tuning in. And the incredible thing about this life, I find, is that every day happens once. What that means is it's like you suddenly care for every moment. Maulana Rumi has this quote where he says, "I have lived on the edge of insanity, wanting to know reasons, knocking on a door. The door opens. I was knocking from the inside. Rather than the person thinking the free, it's like the world is chaotic and they are free. Suddenly it's as if the world was free. It was man's mind that was being chaotic. This was kind of like Buddha's ultimate realization, at least in regards to how the Lotus Sutra conceived it. Uh, the notion that Buddha, before he kind of transitioned out of this reality, kind of came into a shock, looked at his disciples and said, "We were enlightened all along." Which means that his mind had finally realized the freedom of stillness and silence. Much blessings and namaste. The pilots of consciousness navigate as their whole plane of existence.